Hello and welcome to another episode of DCU Daily. And well, today we're talking a little bit about Marvel, which you might be wondering why we're talking about Marvel and DC. But I think the reason why we're talking about Marvel is, well, A, because they're in a lot of trouble recently, it seems like. And I think it's a good place to make some comparisons because DC is, of course, getting off to a brand new start here with the reboot that James Gunn and Peter Safran are doing with the DCU. So I think it's a good time to make a comparison. Like all these missteps that Marvel has been making of late, how can they be avoided by the new DC that we are hoping to get on screen soon? So, in this big article that we got on Variety recently, they were talking about things like the Blade movie and how it went through pre-production hell, multiple rounds of script revisions, and including at one point they had a script where Blade had fourth billing in his own movie, and so Marshall Ali almost walked away from the role. Like that's certainly not a good thing to hear about a movie that I think a lot of fans were excited about, are still excited about. Of course, its latest shutdown of production came because of the actor strike, so we still don't know when we're gonna get this Blade movie. There's other issues with like the Marvels, for example. The budget got bloated by like over $100 million beyond what it was originally supposed to be. I think they were supposed to produce it for like 150 some odd $1 million, and now the budget of the movie that we're going to get in theaters is going to be like over 250 million because they had so many rounds of reshoots to try to make the story make sense, because it looked like the story was a jumbled mess. And at one point, apparently the director of the movie kind of stepped away and during post-production to start working on another project she had going on, which is a red flag, for any director on any movie per se. And then we of course had a lot of like new details on what's been going on behind the scenes with the Daredevil show, how the budget for She-Hulk was so insanely high, like 25 million or more per episode, and that was more than what we had on a per episode budget for the last season of the Game of Thrones show. Like if you remember the last season of Game of Thrones, even though a lot of people didn't necessarily like what was going on in the show, you could tell that that was some of the best like made and some of the best looking TV you've ever seen, and they were spending less money per episode on that show than they were spending on She-Hulk. I don't know how that happens. I don't know how that works. I don't know where that money went. I mean, maybe it had to do a lot with the fact that they had so many fully CGI'd characters in the show. That probably took up a lot of the money. But also, like when you've got She-Hulk dancing, and who was I forget who the cameo was.
Megan Thee Stallion, I
Megan
think
Thee
it was.
Yeah, like they were twerking with Megan Thee Stallion. It was like, I'm like, really? Is that where the budget needed to go? Like, I don't know. I'm just saying. Okay, so there was a lot of these stories, and of course, the whole Jonathan Majors and Kang situation. Like, Jonathan Majors, he's got a trial date now. His case is gonna go to trial, and if he's convicted for what he's been accused for, then of course, I mean, that will come with it, maybe with a prison sentence, whether it's a commuted sentence or whatever the case might be. Um, but certainly, I think he's got to be out from any of his roles. We know that Kang is his biggest project. That's the biggest role that's still out there, because I think a lot of his other projects he got taken off from or dropped from when this mess first started. But now Disney's still holding out, hoping that the case goes in Jonathan Majors' favor and they can continue with him in the role of Kang. We have, of course, seen him in the new Loki season 2. He's made a few appearances with Dirk Timely. He was in Quantumania earlier this year. We're expected to see him in at least one of the upcoming Avengers movies. He's the current version of Thanos, the big bad in the MCU, but because of everything that's going on around him, it looks like Marvel might be considering going with Doctor Doom as like the new Thanos and making a switch like mid story, which and then that in and of itself would be a little weird, because I think it'd kind of come a little out of nowhere. It would also, to a lot of fans, be like an admission of defeat on the part of Marvel, saying, yes, we screwed up,
Yeah,
so now we're changing tact. And I think what would be even worse would be like trying to bring back Tony Stark and Natasha Romanoff, or Steve Rogers and those characters, which is something that they've also apparently been tossing around as an idea. which I think like we always knew that they were gonna come back at some point, but to bring them back now in this situation, again, it would be blatantly obvious like what they're trying to do, and I think that will come across as a little disingenuous, and it may only tarnish the legacies of those characters in the MCU. So there's a lot of that going on in the Marvel verse right now, and Kevin Feige's got a lot of cleanup to do, and it looks like they're doing what they can. I think Echo was a high point. The trailer that they put out recently that looked good. TVMA. I'm looking forward to that. But I think ultimately all of these issues they come down to really they were trying to do too much too fast, like especially since 2020 in the post Endgame era with Disney Plus, they were trying to put out too many TV shows. They're trying to put out too many movies. All like in I think now we're getting at least 3 Marvel movies a year. That used to be like a every so often we'll get a 3 Marvel movies a year deal, and then every other year we'll get like 2 movies, and then but back then we didn't in phases 1 to 3 we didn't even have any TV shows. So I think, yeah, ultimately it became a quantity over quality issue. So John, I wanted to ask you, like, with all of these problems that have sort of resulted from that approach in recent years over at Marvel, how can DC, I mean, beyond the obvious, obviously they don't have to do too much too fast. That would be the obvious answer. But beyond just that, like how can DC, how can James Gunn and Peter Safran avoid all these missteps that Marvel has taken recently?
Well, I think just mainly let everything breathe. I mean, the problem, as you said, quantity versus quality is just it's too much. Even Bob Iger said that they need to backtrack on the Disney Plus shows because they're clearly not working. A lot of them are not getting a lot of traction. They're not very good, and that's proponent with Daredevil getting like they're pretty much just flushed all the writers and are pretty much starting from scratch because it's just they realize that they're going in that direction. And I think with James Gunn, even though there has been some, I don't want to say controversy, but there has been some noticeable times of history repeating itself, like Superman Legacy getting all these cameos and characters when they might not be necessary, and him kind of backpedaling on, like, oh, this is the start of the DCU. No, this is the start of the DCU. And even amid all of that, as long as James Gunn can maybe get off of threads a little bit more and just let the characters speak for themselves, let them breathe, I think they'll be fine. Again, sure, we're going to get a Superman film, we're going to get a Batman film, but also let these characters, like, even though Swamp Thing isn't like totally unknown, but something like like mid-range characters that people have wanted to see for a long time, have them take the reins and have them speak for themselves instead of trying to make them like other characters or whatever Marvel's doing, just like make them the same character but with a different coat of paint or something like that. Because I know Captain Marvel, the biggest qualm with that in terms of, well, the Marvel's coming out, is that she's like kind of like a smorgasbord of like all these different Avengers but has no identity of her own. And so, again, just let the characters speak for themselves and let them breathe. Focus on not totally unknowns, not totally the most known out of the ones that have to make you money. Get those mid-range characters and let them breathe. Like, don't have 50 movies coming out at once. Don't have 17 TV shows coming out one year. Just, I think what they have, which is about 5 or 6 movies each year. Just have one movie a year. One movie a year is perfect. That's, I mean, I still stand by that phase one of Marvel is still the best phase we got. And we were just having the building blocks. Let it be just one. And don't go in, and once it does start to get popular, which I think it will be with, people liking James Gunn and getting a new Superman, even if a lot of people liked Henry Cavill, just have a steady pace. Have a steady pace. Just one, maybe 2 films a year. Don't do three. Don't do four. That's just too much. And like superhero fatigue is just gonna keep going and going. Let it breathe and just have it be just keep it calm, keep it calm. And I think that's what James Gunn and actually paying your VFX artists. I think that will also very much help.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that was another thing in the Marvel article that yeah, we know this is something that I think we have covered on DCU Daily even that the Marvel VFX team voted to unionize not too long ago because of like these super long
Yep.
shifts and then just these unreasonable requirements that they have for every project seemingly that gets thrown their way, and they're the ones who get left carrying the bag because they're just told to get the work done, and who can blame them trying to unionize and find better working conditions? I think everybody deserves to get a weekend. Everybody deserves to work a normal work day and not be working for 18 hours a day and not get any time off and have to sleep in at their place of work because otherwise they wouldn't get the work done. Like it's just some of the conditions that the VFX artists had to go through over at Marvel. Yeah, I think it was a long time coming. I think in that article, one of the things they pointed out, like one of the reasons why Victoria Alonso was fired from Marvel from a high level position, she was one of like the left or right hands to Kevin Feige for years. She was in charge of all the physical production, like in charge of making sure all this stuff gets done and made. I think one of the reasons why Bob Iger, when he came back into the fold over at Disney and all the other Disney executive leadership, they were like, how has this become such a mess? Like, and I think ultimately, in a manner of speaking, she was scapegoated because it wasn't necessarily her fault, because she wasn't the one who was saying we got to make like 5 movies a year and 3 shows a year. But she was being asked to get it done. Like she was being assigned all of that stuff and asked to get it done. And I think there are just certain limitations to what you can do with a reasonable amount of quality in a certain period of time. So, yeah, I think like you said, it's a numbers game partly that James Gunn and Peter Safran know this. Especially Peter Safran being a studio producer for years and years, he's been involved with DC projects for many years with the DCEU before even the DCU began. So he's got experience. He knows how like the Aquaman movies came together, how like the Shazam movies came together. So I think they'll know like what the upper limits, even if they have like the entirety of the Leavesden studios to themselves. I still think like having the resources doesn't necessarily mean you'll have the quality because there's only so many quality filmmakers out there, and you can only employ them, so many of them at any given time. So I hope that they'll put a focus on the stories, and they'll make sure that they don't put anything into production that is undercooked, like what was about to happen with the Blade movie, or they certainly hopefully don't end up in a situation where we're getting a movie that used supposed to be $150 million movie that is now a $250 million movie because they had to put in like 100 million for reshoots. That's a lot of money for reshoots.
Mhm.
And James Gunn, for his part, has said multiple times, I mean, especially in his presentation for the DCU last year, that and he was he almost sort of like these took these shots over at Marvel and Kevin Feige in a fairly well, not indirect, but pretty direct way without naming any names, that he said that he knows what it's like to take projects that aren't ready to go into production and put them into production, basically with like scripts that aren't ready to go, that are still being developed, and stories that aren't quite there yet with underdeveloped character arcs. And he said we're not going to do that. Story will always come first in the DC universe. So I really like where his head has been at this whole time. And I think as far as the volume of production goes, that will just be a matter of they don't want to saturate their calendar with 3 or 4 DC movie releases a year because, for example, this year we have had 4 DC movies coming out, and right now there's some doubts whether the combined 4 of them are going to cross $1 billion in box office receipts. That's a pretty putrid number to think about. If you think about like
Yeah.
they've spent almost $1 billion on all 4 of these movies combined, but they're struggling to make back that $1 billion in at the box office. So yeah, I think two maybe 3 movies a year is probably the maximum you want to do. Maybe do 1 or 2 TV shows a year. That's probably a good amount.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, more than the quantity, is about quality. As long as they're telling
Yeah.
quality
Exactly.
stories, that's going to be the key.
I
Uh,
think what would be
yeah.
a really good idea in terms of expanding on stuff, like really go, even though ironically it's not called the extended universe anymore, really extend into all forms of media. I think James Gunn did mention that he wanted not just TV shows and movies, but books, not comic books, but like books, like real books. Well, not real books, but you know what, novels. Novels
Yeah.
and video games
Like
and
Star Wars. Yeah.
yeah, like just really going into the extended media because that could cause this universe to really grow properly, but not have superhero fatigue because there's people that prefer video games over movies or TV shows over movies or just like reading a good book, and you'll get all of that content spread out properly into so many different forms, and then on top of that, just just really letting, just all different types of people come together under this net, and I think that's a really good idea, and again, still not oversaturated, and then on top of that, also, I think in order to get that sort of if you wanna have multiple movies a year, maybe 2 or 3, like, as you mentioned, I think a really good way to do that is have the official DCU and then have an Elseworld movie or an Elseworld TV show like The Batman Part 2 or Joker Folie à Deux or other interesting ideas. Hell, give Mike Flanagan that Clayface movie that he promised us cuz like I mean, I'd love to see that. Mike Flanagan just put out Fall of the House of Usher and that was absolutely excellent. I mean, James Gunn's a pretty smart guy. He would I mean, he's got to
Yeah.
he's got to
Yeah.
notice that and see like, hey, let's give this guy a DC movie. That would be awesome. So,
Yeah.
and get as many people as you possibly can. Get horror fans on the board. So
Yeah.
extending the media, extending the universe, and extending different forms to really get everybody and not have people fatigue would just be so perfect for the new DCU.
Yeah, and I think what you just mentioned that got me literally just giddy with excitement is the fact that I think James Gunn is looking at this opportunity as like the first time ever in mainstream franchise IP filmmaking storytelling ever that he's got an opportunity to start from scratch and do it in a very deliberate, planned out way. Because if you think about it, Star Wars sort of, yeah, they made the trilogy of movies. They made the first one, and then that became such a big hit that they got that chance to make two more. And then after that, it sort of became a franchise. But it wasn't like George Lucas had planned everything out. And even since the first trilogy of movies and even the prequel trilogy, there wasn't ever really like a writer's room or like these creatives behind the scenes, like almost treating it like a TV show and planning stuff out granularly or anything like that. Even with the MCU, it wasn't until I think like phases, maybe three phases, certainly like phase one was very much like we'll do this movie, we will do that movie, and then maybe we'll get a chance to do another movie. Oh, and now let's do an Avengers movie. Oh, that movie made 1.5 billion. And it just sort of became like this snowball rolling downhill. And it wasn't until I think like phases maybe 3 and 4 that they really started to put together a brain trust of people behind the scenes and having this plan. And now I think they're realizing that maybe the plan they put together wasn't the best one, at least in terms of the execution and the volume at which they've tried to, expand out from where they were at Endgame, which is for a lot of people was like, whoa, there's a lot of people in that movie alone. So I think for James Gunn, this is a fantastic opportunity to do a lot of what maybe Star Wars and Marvel over the years have not really gotten right because, they've made mistakes and sort of stumbled their way through a lot of success, but also a lot of failures. And I think now with DC, James Gunn sees this as an opportunity to kind of stand on the shoulders of giants and take the lessons learned from those past experiences by those other franchises and apply those lessons to what he's doing. And I really love the concept of having this like mainstream narrative. So like if you just watch the movies and maybe the TV shows, you know what you need to know. But if you really are into like one of the characters, like maybe you really love Swamp Thing, and they put out a Swamp Thing novel and you love the show, but now you want to read more about the character, you can go read the novel. Or if you really love the new, I don't know, let's say the new Suicide Squad movie, if there were to be one, but you wanted to kind of play a video game and expand on that side of the universe, then you can go play that video game. Whereas like you don't have to keep up with the main narrative of the movies and the TV shows. I really
Exactly.
love that idea, kind of creating these bubbles So like you're expanding, and I think it then organically adds a lot of layering and detail, because then you can call back those details and layers in future stories that you tell. Where I think DC's already done has been doing this for years, where they say, "Hey, here's a
Of course.
companion comic book that you can read, or here's a three comic books that will really give you an idea of the stories and the concepts that are going to be in the upcoming movie." I think in the future they could do that, but that's everything that becomes a companion piece is fully in canon with what you're going to see on screen for that big movie release or that big TV show release. So then you're again covering more ground, and you're giving your fans an opportunity to dive deeper where they want to, but not necessarily making it mandatory, which I think is something that Marvel has struggled with, because their approach has been, you need to have watched WandaVision and you need to have watched Miss Marvel to know who two out of the three leading characters in the Marvels is going to be. Whereas I think for a lot of people who didn't do that, that may be like one reason why they might not want to go see the Marvels, because they're like, I don't want to spend like a whole weekend catching up on 12 episodes, or like was
Right.
15 episodes of TV to watch a 2.5, not even a two, like a 2 hour long movie. So I think, like, I like the I really like what you just mentioned there with James Gunn's approach, because that will give fans the ability to be as engaged with the franchise as they want to be, or as, unengaged. Like, they could just be following the mainstream narrative, or they could dive in and get a whole new perspective on, like, this particular part of the DC universe, and I think it will give the whole universe a much more lived in feel and history to it that I don't think even Marvel has been able to accomplish with the MCU, despite the fact they've been around for almost 2 decades now. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to what James Gunn has planned out now. Um,
Yeah.
I know we started talking about Marvel mistakes and how DC can learn from them, but I think in hindsight, James Gunn might have already learned a lot of the lessons, having been part of the Marvel sphere for a
Right.
long time with the Guardians movies. Yeah, guys, let us know in the comments. Are you as excited as we are, like just talking through what James Gunn has already put out there in terms of his plans? And are you excited to see what they're going to be doing with the DCU, is particularly in light of all the mishaps over at the MCU? Do you think DC is well prepared, and to avoid those kind of mistakes? Let us know in the comments below. Of course, like and subscribe for more content like this. We are here each and every day with more DC movie and TV news and updates and reviews and previews. So keep checking back here for more.